Brian Krause again, the author of um, The Law and Men. And chapter 6 is about abortion and reproductive rights. Do you want to go into that, Brian?
Well, sure. It's yet another chapter where, as you know, as much as I'm down for a debate on just about anything, I do avoid getting into the issue of pro-choice or pro-life. I do, however, while I avoid that controversial issue, I do challenge this idea that abortion is regulated in such a way as to undermine the freedom and reproductive rights of women. I don't believe either in the present or in the past that was the purpose of abortion regulation. And again, I offer a lot of data in support of that position. It's also another issue where again goes to why I wrote this book. Certain activists needlessly divide us and engage in demagoguery. Demagoguery, of course, is when you appeal to emotion and prejudice rather than reason. And I think that keeps us from having good discussions. I think it keeps us from properly educating and enlightening the public on important issues. If you don't mind, I want to read a quote that I put in the book just to give you an example of how unhealthy the approach that some people take is to abortion.
Yes,
And
please.
there's a quote, one of the quotes that I offered, it was from the Huff Post. And I had put this in a podcast I did as well, but it says rape and pro-life ideology are both methods of dehumanizing women, and both are caused by the same sick flaw of society, the need for dominance. Now, I will tell you this, as much as I avoided the issue of abortion, I think statements like that are disgusting. And that's why people cannot have a sensible discussion about this issue. And it is a complicated issue. It is not an easy issue. It's an issue that deals with complex medical, ethical, philosophical issues. But when people say stuff like that, that just gets us on the wrong track. So I tried to address that. I talk about the history of abortion a little bit and get into some present statistics and whatnot.
Okay, yeah, good, good. And yeah, you did a good job in this chapter. Yeah, because now I think you mentioned there was where is it? There was at least one female doctor who was against abortion for some reason, and I had it in front of me, but I can't find it. Was it Elizabeth
Oh, there
Blackwell?
were a couple. Sure,
Yeah.
yeah, there were a couple. I get into the history. I get into history a little bit. Before, let me say this real quick too, because I want to give one of the reasons I wrote this too is like in the footnotes and whatnot. I quote a lot of great articles and other authors and books. There was a great book by a guy named William Della Penna, and he wrote an amicus brief in support of in the Dobbs v. Jackson decision that was cited by Justice Alito. And my understand Della Penna, from what I understand, he's not a hardcore pro-life guy. I think he's more moderate on the issue, but he wrote a 1,000-plus-page book called I believe it was the Myths of Abortion History, and I'm actually working my way through the book right now. I haven't read the whole thing. It's 1,000-plus pages. It gets into the weeds on the common law, going to cases from way back, going back into medieval times and whatnot. So it's a really wonderful book. As I said, I'm still making my way through it. But yeah, in the history section, I quote two doctors, a Mary Dixon Jones and then an Elizabeth Blackwell, who both had expressed negative views about abortion. And again, the point wasn't to argue the issue of abortion as much as it was to show throughout history, there were very prominent and gifted women who opposed it. So this idea that it's born of some desire to control women, control their bodies, whatnot, is just not on point, in my opinion.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, quote by Elizabeth Blackwell: "The gross perversion and destruction of motherhood by the abortionist filled me with indignation and awakened active antagonism. So
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
a quote by Elizabeth Blackwell. Um, so now you see abortion as a really hot topic issue when it comes to society now. You have states like Illinois and let's say Colorado where they're really lax on the issue, and women have availability to Planned Parenthood, let's say, which not everyone who goes there gets an abortion. That's there to help women, and but then there's states like Texas or uh, Alabama, Mississippi, who are really harsh towards women. Let's say if they have a medical need and there's lack of, let's say, Planned Parenthoods or procedures for the woman if her or the baby's life is at stake. So it seems like in America, it depends what state you're in. You're either, I think in Illinois, I could be wrong. You can have an abortion up to 9 months, which some people could view that as really extreme. Like, whoa. But we don't know the situation if the mom's health is in dire need or whatnot, or if it's something else. So yeah, but then there's situations as in these really red conservative states in which there's a lot of women who don't have resources when something goes wrong, or if they need Planned Parenthood or an emergency abortion if life is at stake, and then maybe they will have to uh, drive to another state. So um, I'm not sure what you think about the role, not so much your opinion, but about the really big divide and how it's become so contentious in debates in America, and that's why so many people vote. I know it's not on my top three, four, five when I vote, but it's on many people's.
Sure.
So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I'll give you my thoughts on that. I did want to correct one thing I said because I mentioned the Della Penna book. It's actually Dispelling the Myths of Abortion History, and that's Carolina Academic Press, January 1st, 2023, by Joseph Della Penna. I think I said his name wrong as well, so I apologize for that. But I am making my way through that book. That's a really good book as well. To answer your question, there's a couple things I would say about that. The, the first thing I would say, and one of the points I try to make is that even you take every state in the union, even the states that have restricted abortion a lot, women still, even in the very strict red states, in every state they can get an abortion in certain circumstances and up to a certain period of time. You compare that with the right of a man to opt out of fatherhood, and he doesn't have that right at all, right? I would argue, and I did argue, and again, this is not picking on women, this is not something that's their fault. I don't believe in this concept of privilege, but they do have more reproductive rights than men do. They just do. And when I say that, I'm not suggesting necessarily that men should have more. This is a complicated topic that involves all sorts of concerns and considerations. But I do attack the idea that women's reproductive rights are under attack and that men can just do whatever they want. Again, that's just not correct. A man who's facing an unwanted pregnancy, he's bound to 18 years of servitude. There are very, very rare circumstances where he could get out of his responsibilities of being a father, and very rare circumstances. If the woman decides he's going to pay and take him to court, he's paying, right? So there's no way to opt out. And I know people will say, well, you're not talking about equivalent things, obviously, because one involves a woman carrying a child within her. But again, if we're talking about whose rights we're trying to undermine here, we're a lot stricter with men than we are with women. That's just a fact. Now, to get to your other point as well, I make the point, at the end of the book, if you look, not the end of the book, at the end of the chapter, if you look at the way abortion is regulated in most of Europe, for instance. Everybody loves to talk, oh, how great Europe is, how much more enlightened it is. They're a lot stricter on abortion than the United States was for a long time. I mean, prior to Dobbs, no state in the union could regulate abortion prior to the 20, I think it was like the 24 to 28th week of pregnancy. The mainland Europe, most of what you'll find is abortion on demand through 12 weeks, and then thereafter with exceptions. So the reason we're in this situation where we have extremes both ways, I think, is because the Supreme Court stuck its nose where it didn't belong in Roe versus Wade, which was back in '73, and we've paid the price for it ever since. I think had that not happened, states would have found their own balance on this issue.
Yeah, yeah, that's it's a very complicated issue. It's an emotional issue for many people. Many women who feel strongly about it, and yeah, there are men out there who, let's say, if their um significant other, their girlfriend or their wife, or just someone they slept with, gets pregnant, and let's say the man is very conservative against abortion, but the woman, let's say she lives in a state like Illinois or California or Colorado, she can, go get the abortion in a certain amount of time. Yeah, but that's just the way it is. I don't know how that law could change into the man's favor. It's really hard to do, because then um, you'd have to prove also that it's really the man's baby, and then so yeah, that would be really hard. Um,
Well,
and
believe it or not, my goal in writing this, of course, was not necessarily to push for more reproductive rights for men, although one could make that argument. My whole goal here is to get us out of this stupid mentality where we look at this issue through we look at it through the lens of oppression, of men trying to oppress women, and I just think that's so foolish. There's so much more to this issue that needs to be taught. Complex medical, ethical things. When you take this discussion outside of that stupid paradigm, you end up with a much better, much richer, much more enlightened discussion, and I think you'll end up with much better, more thoughtful policy as well across the board.
yeah, yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Before the show ends, I I just have one more thought. I wonder what this does though to there's all those Planned Parenthoods in the red states that have closed down, and I wonder what that does to women who need access to Planned Parenthood, who might not have health insurance, who might have to go to Planned Parenthood, and wouldn't it make it worse if there was 16-year-old who didn't come from much. She got pregnant, and still had the baby, and kept the baby. And what kind of life does that give that newborn? You would think, okay, if there's Planned Parenthood, they could give her resources on what to do, options on what to do, um, educate her. And now you have maybe a 16 or 17-year-old girl who is in Mississippi or Alabama who doesn't have any clue now because the resources are depleted there. Whereas that, or she'll have to, you know, or if she needs more help, and but yeah, yeah, so it's depleted there. However, then on the other case, and this isn't mentioned in the book, so I'm sorry for going off course.
No
Um,
problem.
it's and then something I found strange when I looked this up. Oh, I looked this up like a year ago. I saw it online somewhere where, um, when teenagers need an abortion, um, there's some states like Illinois, unless if Illinois changed, where you don't need a parent's consent for a teenager to have an abortion, which that I think would be a huge thing if you're living at home with mom and dad, but you're gonna get an abortion maybe without them knowing. Can would do most doctors maybe feel comfortable with that, or that's just something I found strange. Where
Oh, and
yeah,
this is a rare moment where I will share my opinion. I think it's outrageous that parents in states like Illinois that they don't notify them, and you know what the reasoning is? They're so good. They're the people who push this are. I have to give them credit. They're if they're nothing else, they are clever. The way they make the argument in support of that foolish policy is they say, well, what if the child's being, what if the underage girl who goes to get an abortion or whatever, what if she's being abused by her father, which sadly does happen. Of course, that reasoning is still idiotic. You don't take away a parent's right based on the fact that some parents are bad. Obviously, certain parents lose their rights when it's proven that they're bad parents, but you don't start with that assumption. And I would, those of us who know better on this issue, one way we can push back on that is say, hey, well, look, how many girls have been exploited by being dragged to abortion clinics, whether it's older guys who've gotten them pregnant or whatever. So yeah, I'm with you on that. I think it's outrageous. You start with the assumption that the parent needs to be in the know. Anything with minors, parents need to know unless there's a very good reason why their parents shouldn't know, and at that point a court needs to adjudicate that and enter an order, in my opinion. So
yeah, yeah, so okay. Well, is there before we head off? Is there anything else you'd like to bring up?
no, just as with the other chapters, again, this is about coming to more, taking a more sensible approach to these issues, getting the emotional stuff out of it, getting this oppression talk that just leads people down the wrong path. There's a lot when it comes to abortion. There's a lot to consider, a lot of complicated stuff, and it doesn't help when people demagogue the issue.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for
All right.
having me.